Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Past, Present, and Future of Quality Culture, presented by Retica Systems and Susan Schniepp, who is a fellow at Regulatory Compliance Associates. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature and we'll have a QA section at the end. Once we're done today, I'll send out a copy of the slides as well as answers to all the questions we receive and a recording of the presentation. Before we begin, I want to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Taylor Minks, and I am the marketing lead at Retica Systems. Retica Systems is a technology company using data, analytics, and expertise to deliver meaningful insights to quality and safety professionals around the world. By applying artificial intelligence to large and disparate government data sets, Retica Systems empowers its customers to improve compliance, increase product quality, and build a more efficient organization. Founded in 2010, Retica Systems serves over 200 customers in the pharma, medical device, and food industries, including 19 of the top 20 pharma companies and 9 of the top 10 medical device companies. Today's presenter, Susan Schniepp, Distinguished Fellow at Regulatory Compliance Associates, is the knowledge leader responsible for training and advising RCA staff and clients on current trends and issues facing the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device industries. Her background includes CGMPs, audit readiness, change control, investigations, supplier quality, and batch record reviews. She has more than 40 years of experience in quality assurance, serving in leadership roles at leading companies. In addition, she has been on the Parental Drug Association, PDA Board of Directors from 2011 to 2013 and 2016 to 2019, and currently serves as the chair-elect. And now I'll pass it along to Sue to begin today's webinar.
Thank you, Taylor. It's a pleasure to be here. And let's move on to the next slide. So today we're going to discuss quality metrics, and we're going to talk about quality culture and how they relate, and some of the regulations behind it, potential models for measuring quality, and then of course, how data integrity and quality culture come together, and the expectations of the regulators regarding quality culture. So with that, let's move to our first section, which is the past. I love this quote because I think you'll see that with respect to data integrity, and we're going to get to that in the last section, we keep repeating that. Data integrity issues began to arise, and those of you who are old enough like me to remember the Barr decision, there's a lot around data integrity that keeps coming up over and over again. So I like this quote because progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think that's what we see going on in sometimes in our industry, is that we don't remember how we got some of the regulations that exist today, and we repeat our past mistakes. So let's move on and go to the beginning of this journey. And it really started with a quote from Janet Woodcock. The idea was to get the industry to kind of self-regulate. So she was striving for a maximally efficient, agile, flexible pharmaceutical manufacturing sector that reliably produces high quality drug products without extensive regulatory oversight. That's kind of the quote that set this all in motion. So when we move on to the next slide, we'll see that there was a lot of concern in 2012 about drug shortages. And so Congress passed Fedasia, which is the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, in July of 2012. And in Title VII, and you see the section there, they allowed for risk-based inspections for the industry. Later on in Title VII, it allowed for records to be requested in advance or in lieu of inspection. So instead of the FDA showing up on your doorstep and saying, we're here to inspect you, they could request information, records ahead of time, ahead of the inspection. And then in Title 10, you see that the FDA was to report to Congress on the state of drug shortages, and that was to happen annually. So putting this, now at the same time that this was all going on, the other thing that was happening in the industry was why were drug shortages happening? Because at the time there were a lot. And part of the reason drug shortages were happening was because there was this aging facilities. So tangential to the metrics and the quality culture, we had aging facilities. In other words, the facilities that were producing many of the drugs that were showing up on the drug shortage list were degrading and not being maintained and just old. They were 30, 40 years old. And so there were lots of downtime, problems that came up during manufacturing, like excessive particles in the drug. And so what FDA did was come up with a strategic plan on how to handle the drug shortages. And that involved the proposal for metrics. And that happened in 2014. And you can see here in the Federal Register, they asked the industry for assistance in drafting the strategic plan to deal with drug shortages. So next slide, we see that we have, and just click until we fill all of these in. We see the timeline. So the Federal Register notice came out. Industry gave some initial responses. Conferences from a lot of different trade organizations were being held. ISPE, PDA, Brookings had a stakeholder meeting, and we came up with draft guidance. FDA came up with draft guidance, and that was version 1, and everybody commented on that. And one of the elements that came out of all of these discussions was the fact that you could request any metrics that you wanted, really. It didn't, you know, what FDA proposed initially was like rejection rate on batches, kappa rates. But the conversation became that without the culture of the organization being assessed and behind the metrics, you couldn't really count on the data. So that's how they tie together. You needed to have a functioning, efficient quality metric system that gave you reliable data, and you had to count on the integrity of the culture of an organization in order to have confidence in the data that they were sending you. And off of that, those discussions and a lot of these conferences, you can see PDA had 4, ISPE had 3 initiatives. The discussion turned to, well, how do you measure quality culture? Next slide. So that moves us to the present, really, and really what we're going to focus on here is background on developing a standard. Next slide. So the question the industry really asked, is there a set of mature quality attributes that are a surrogate for quality culture behaviors? And we studied the relationship between the quality culture behavior and the maturity quality attributes, and to try to see if they relate. Now, what we mean by a mature quality attribute is those things in your quality management system, your CAPA program, your change control, your investigations procedures, all of that, how you report deviations, how you record batch rejection rates, all of those things are in your quality culture, or in your quality management system. And that is your attribute. Those are your attributes. And we'll see that a little bit later. And what we wanted to know was, if you had mature attributes, does that relate to behaviors? Behaviors are the behaviors of your employees and your management, and they're harder to measure. You know, are people happy? Are they speaking up? Are they talking to management? Do they understand their job? So let's move on to the next. The foundation of this was if you could quality attributes, which are quantifiable and easily measured, if they equaled quality behaviors, in other words, you had quality attributes and it was reflected in your behaviors, which are difficult to measure and rely on observation, that then defines your quality culture. So if quality cultures equal quality behaviors equals quality culture, or quality attributes equal quality behaviors equals quality culture, then if you can measure your quality attributes, you can define your quality culture. Next slide. And so PDA, now I can only speak to PDA. A lot of this work was also going on in other trade organizations, as I said. ISP did a lot of work in this area also. And what we did was we surveyed our memberships and we ran the data we got back from the questionnaire that everybody took. Well, not everybody, but a lot of our members took. And we did some statistical analysis on it. And because this is a social science based on the data, we were able to determine that there really is a relationship between the quality culture behavior and mature quality attributes in your system. Next slide. But we took it a step further. We worked with St. Gallen's and they had a program for operational excellence, and we gave them our data and asked them to see if they saw the same correlation. And in fact, in 2017, their analysis showed that there was, in fact, a correlation. And this is based on 326 pharmaceutical sites around the world. And so their data and our data confirmed that quality attributes equal quality behaviors equal quality culture. Next slide. So the most impactful attributes that were identified in the surveys were participation of people at conferences. You can read them all here, but these are collecting management review metrics. All of these are the positive aspects, right? Continuous improvement programs that are attributes of a system, of a company that can relate to quality culture. And so I wanted to leave you with these impactful statements, and you can, go back. Taylor's going to give you the slides, and you can see if you have these attributes in your own company. Next slide. So PDA got together a group of individuals, volunteers, and developed what we thought were 5 categories that could be measured that would be part of any organization. And those categories were employee ownership and engagement, continuous improvement, technical excellence, leadership commitment, and communication and collaboration. Those were the big topics. And then we put the attributes in the middle column. And so what the attributes are what we could measure. And then the metrics basically is how you would measure the attributes. So you can see here, if we take the category of communication and collaboration, which is on the bottom, quality communications, management review and metrics, internal stakeholder feedback, and collaboration with assessors, you can see that we would measure it by our quality communications, management reviews, metrics, internal stakeholder feedback, a quality culture survey, and operations readiness and knowledge. And we broke that down. The metrics we provided were based off the attributes we identified, and they fit into the category. So the ranking in these would be 1 to 5. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see that we took that body of work and let's back one slide. I want to go a little bit more into when we would assess these metrics, we would rank them 1 to 5. And what the ranking was to do was to give you an idea of where you're at on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the bare minimum and 5 being a mature system. Now that wasn't to say it was good or bad. You had to take into context in determining that number exactly what your company was providing in terms of, like, let's take technical excellence. If you had utilization of new technologies, your organization may not need that to be a 5. And so it may be okay that you might be a 3 on that, or you might not even have that. So this was to be taken into account. You had to look at your business model, what you were actually providing and doing in order to determine what your ranking was. But that didn't mean you had a bad system or good system. It just means you could hone in on where you wanted to spend your resources. And if you wanted to beef up any of these to be like you wanted to move from a 3 to a 5. It was just a snapshot in time of where your culture was based on these categories. All right. But all of this good work then was turned into a training program. And but like so many things, it was PDA specific. And so what PDA did, next slide, was in 2017, PDA became a standards development organization for Ansi. And Ansi is the American National Standards Institute, and it's volunteer standards. And we didn't want our work that we did on quality culture to kind of die on the vine, so to speak. So we decided to put in a proposal to develop a draft standard on quality culture that could be used across the industry. Now, why this is important is because when you are in the standard development process and you work with Ansi, we could not populate the standards development team with only PDA members. We had to reach beyond the PDA membership and the group that put together the culture tool for PDA and get industry representatives from regulators, from the medical device industry, third-party contractors, suppliers. We had to have a representative group that encompassed the entire industry. And so this is just how the standards development process at Ansi would work. You have the idea, you form your technical team, you develop the standard, and then it goes for ballot for public review where anybody in the industry can comment on it. And each one of their comments is deliberated and resolved. Final version is then sent to Ansi and voted on and hopefully adopted. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was the original proposal that we made to Ansi. And what Ansi does is when we put in the proposal, they actually run it through all across everywhere, ISO, other standards, to see if there's anything that exists that is similar as a standard to the one we're proposing. And they found there was absolutely nothing out there that told people how to measure their quality culture. Next slide. So this was the project detail. What we said to Ansi was we wanted to provide a data-driven assessment that allowed companies to measure their quality culture. That's pretty simple. And we wanted them to have a tool that was a way to collect and evaluate information on their quality culture, and then they could benchmark through the data and through the use of the tool that we're proposing for Ansi. So next slide. This was the scope or the abstract of the project. And you can see those 5 categories that we talked about that were in the tool were actually many of the categories that were identified by other organizations, ISPE, St. Gallen's. So those 5 seem to be the top ones that everybody agreed needed to be there to measure an effective quality culture, to measure your quality culture. And so that was the abstract. And next slide, it went into the Ansi standards section, right? And it was a call for volunteers, stakeholders. You can see we had to have people from quality assurance, quality control, engineering, operations, manufacturing, general interest, and regulatory interest members in order to form the technical team. We had to have representation from all of those groups, and we had to look outside of PDA members. And so this was a new standard, and this was basically, next slide, we have the call for volunteers. And you can see that January 14th, 2020, you had to put in your resume and your rationale for why you wanted to join the team. We had quite a lot of interest in this, and so we had to spend some time, a month or two, actually going through all the resumes and applications and picking that collective representative industry group that would work together over 2 years to develop the new standard that we hope Ansi would adopt. Next slide. So that's kind of where we're at. Now, what I can tell you is the standard, the Ansi standard, is in draft. It's being worked on. It's the first final draft, if I can put it that way. It's going to go through multiple iterations, but the team has put together guidance on each one of those 5 sections. We have looked at ISPE's models, PDA models, Deming's models, and so there were a lot of culture information out there that we looked at and compared to be able to draft this standard. So that's the current present state. Now let's look at the future ahead. Next slide. So why is culture important? And here's my little cat just going, why? Why are we doing all of this, right? Next slide. Well, the data integrity and quality culture are now being linked in regulatory expectations. And so PICS, the organization PICS, of which FDA is a member, as is EMA and many other regulators around the world, in their good practices for data management and integrity, they have defined quality culture. And they've given us a little bit of information about how management needs to create a work environment, a culture that is transparent and open. And you can see one in which personnel are encouraged to freely communicate failures and mistakes. Now let's stop here. Well, no, let's go through next one. I want to tell you a little story about this. So a couple of little stories. So MHRA also came up in the same time period with data integrity guidance and definitions, and they too have defined or discussed the organizational culture that should ensure data is complete, all of those ALCOA concepts, right? And then they go on to say the impact of the organizational culture and the behavior driven by performance indicators, right? This is all really important. So in their regulations, regulators are starting to define and link culture to data integrity violations. Next slide. So we have the World Health Organization also jumping in, and they have a guidance on good data and record management, again, handling your data. And so they have in their introduction that companies should adopt a quality culture. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that they go on further to actually define quality culture in their organization. And the piece I want you to focus in on is, of course, highlighted in red. An essential element of the quality culture is the transparent and open reporting of deviations, errors, omissions, and aberrant results at all levels of the organization, irrespective of hierarchy. And that's pretty significant. And if we move on to the next one, we'll see the FDA in their guidance, data integrity and compliance with drug CGMPs, questions and answers. In their introduction, they define quality culture. It is the role of management with executive responsibility to create a quality culture. And then in the absence of management support of a quality culture, quality systems can break down and lead to CGMP noncompliance. So let's get an example here, because I believe in practical examples and how this plays out in the real world. And this one's kind of an interesting one because it was really an attempt for management to encourage employees to do a good job. But what they did created data integrity violations. So I started working for a company as head of their quality department, and they had a goal, the people, it was a contract manufacturing organization, and the goal was to release the batch record to the client within 30 days of the manufacturing of the product. That is a great goal, right? You want to be timely, you want to be quick, and you want to have your clients happy. And management said, this is really good, and we want to encourage this behavior. We want to encourage you to do this activity and release this to our clients in 30 days. So for every time that we meet that, we're going to throw in money and have a big blowout pizza party at the end of the year. And what do you think happened? People began to come up with data integrity violations because they wanted the pizza party. They focused on releasing the batch record, regardless of whether or not investigations had gotten to root cause or were complete. They started to prematurely close investigations, sign off the batch record, release it to the client, and then knowingly reopen the investigation. So they met their 30-day goal, even though they knew that they hadn't completed the investigation and gotten to root cause. They reopened the investigation to complete it out. Now that in and of itself is a data integrity nightmare. Can you imagine explaining in an audit by a regulator, well, we wanted a pizza party? And so sometimes it's, even with good intentions of encouraging employees, management can be unaware of unintended consequences. What you have to look for in your culture to see if these kinds of behaviors even are being encouraged by some unreal expectations or promises of management, that they're unaware of the unintended consequences of some of the goals and things that they ask employees to achieve. Now, another one we want to talk about is a lot of it's tied to investigations, of course, and deviations and CAPAs. And in another company that I was heading up their quality unit, I want you to think about repeat observations and human error as being the cause of deviations, and just retraining people. Because in this case, I had a wonderful operator. I didn't know it at the time. When I started to look through the deviations just to familiarize myself with the organizational structure, what was going on, what kind of investigations did we have. And I noticed that this one operator, Jose, had like 30 deviations tied to him with a specific product that he worked on as an operator. And other employees worked on it too, but Jose had this deviation. He wasn't signing the batch record at a certain point in time during the manufacturing. And as I read the deviations, and the 30 deviations were over a period of 6 months, which to me was a lot. And as I read the deviations, what I found out was they just chalked it up to Jose forgetting to sign the batch record. And so they retrained him all the time. So I called in the staff and I said, what's going on with Jose? Is he capable of doing this job? He seems to have this repeat violation. You keep retraining him, he keeps repeating it, and we're not getting anywhere with solving the problem. And they said, oh, no, he's a great operator. He's very conscientious. We love him. He has great aseptic technique. So he's great. He just has problems with this, one issue. So I wasn't satisfied. And I went to talk to Jose. He was a second shift employee. And I sat him down and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, Sue, I've tried to tell people that this is a poorly designed batch record, that in order for me to sign the batch record at the time that they want me to sign it, I have to leave the product alone, running in the aseptic core, degown, go sign the batch record, come back in, regown. In the meantime, nobody's really watching the product. And so I choose to stay with the product. And then at the end of the run, I try to remember to sign the batch record, but I sometimes forget. And I said, okay, so it's not human error. It's not retraining Jose. It's a poorly designed batch record. But Jose didn't feel that when he was trying to explain this to people, that he was being listened to. So there wasn't an open culture. People weren't receptive to the information that Jose was trying to give them. What I want you to really think about, though, is Jose was not the only person who worked on this product. So what about the rest of the people? There's your data integrity, right? What was everybody else doing? Were they leaving the product alone? Were they just, nobody else was bringing it up? And so if you don't have that open culture, if you're not encouraging people to speak up and you're not listening to them, you do not have a good quality culture. Next slide. Okay, so I've just listed here the available information for you where you can find it. I suggest you check it out. And I'm still on the future because the next slide, we're going to talk about the fact that PDA trained over 100 regulators from MHRA and US FDA on the culture assessment tool. And this is my prediction. I have absolutely no, this is just from listening and being involved in this for a while. Next slide. Here's what some of them said. We can apply the quality culture attributes to improve how we assess firms in non-compliance context. As industry becomes aware and comfortable with this tool, it can be a powerful tool for evaluating CMOs and business partners. Industry could use the PDA tool to be more open with regulators on quality culture. It's nice to differentiate quality culture from quality systems and emphasize the importance of what we make relative to what we do. Okay, this may help us to evaluate the quality of a pharmaceutical company. Those are powerful statements. And so what that leads me to believe is we are going to start to see more and more inspections where regulators will dive in to your quality culture. Next slide. Now, everybody's heard about the new inspection protocol project, and that's FDA's, and I believe it's in pilot right now. You can actually read more if you go to the FDA website and you look at the white paper, FDA Pharmaceutical Quality Oversight, One Quality Voice. But I have highlighted the section I think that's a little bit critical and telling of what is to come. NIP is expected to increase the quality focus of investigator assessments so that facilities and behaviors found to exceed basic compliance can be recognized as such. So they're going to, I think this clearly tells us they're going to start looking at the behaviors and the quality culture of an organization. Now, I don't know what happened in the pilot. I don't know, anything about who participated in the pilot. But when I read these words and I put it together with the guidances that have come out across the board worldwide, the focus on quality culture is going to be there in the future. Next slide. All right, so this is a 483, obviously, that was given to a company. And I just wanted to point out that the observation one, there is a failure to thoroughly review any unexplained discrepancy, whether or not the batch has been already distributed. And you can see in some of this language that there was evidence of data mismanagement or manipulation, or a justification for not conducting or planning such an audit. All right, so that's pretty powerful words. This is basically saying you have some data integrity violations. Next slide. And this is unusual because, again, this is not, I did not have, I got this all off the FDA website. It's all in the public domain. And this company wrote back to FDA, and this is not the part I want to focus on. The next slide, please. This is part that I blew up because this answer was significant in that the company's goal moving forward is to ensure a robust culture of quality and sustainable GXP compliance. That's, we're now getting into where people are actually saying, okay, we understand we have to look at our culture. And that's the future. I believe we'll see more of this, more companies that will be looking at their quality culture and trying to improve it. And with that, next slide, I want to say that quality is always fashionable. And I'm ready to take any questions. Taylor, I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Sue. At this time, please enter any questions you have in the QA feature or just the chat box itself. We'll give it a little bit. And thank you for presenting with us today, Sue. I hope everyone took a piece of knowledge away from this.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic that people, not, like I said, not only PDA, but ISP is very active in this. I have several ISP members on the Ansi standard development team. St. Gallen's has certainly been looking at operational excellence for a while. This is, I don't want to say it's groundbreaking territory, but it's new thought that people are starting to relate data with quality culture and speak up culture.
Yes, and we do have a quick question. Somebody thanked you for the webinar presentation. They said it was great. And then they said, who is generally responsible for completing the assessment at the company?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know that anybody has actually everybody seems to be responsible, but right now, a lot of what we've worked with the PDA tool has been the auditing department, but it's a different kind of audit. And that's what we've been stressing. It is not an audit. You can't go in and say, okay, show me your quality manual. It's an interviewing audit. The way the PDA looks at it is you are interviewing all levels of the organization. So the line worker, the warehouse worker, the operators, the management staff, and you're getting their perspective on what they think of the culture. And what we found when we did this was that upper management often had a much rosier picture of the organizational culture than the people beneath them, the middle manager. The ones who were stressed the most about the culture happened to be the mid-level managers. And so it was interesting. The idea is to collect that information, people's perspective on the culture across the organization, and then absorb that feedback and make the changes to those areas where you feel it's optimal to make the changes. I don't know if that answered the question, but we worked with a lot of audit groups, and we had to change the auditor's perspective so that they went after this not as a, okay, here's observation one, but more as a commentary on how people were receiving the culture and how they felt about working in the culture. And a lot of it had to do with, did people know their jobs and how they fit into the big picture?
Thank you. Another question, they want to know, they said they might have missed this. What's the timeline for Ansi draft standard to be final and available for purchase?
Right now, like I said, we're kind of in the final, we've got all the parts together. We are doing a final edit review. I would expect next year sometime we will see the Ansi standard. It does have to go to a public review period. What's interesting about the and I would encourage all of you to look when that public review, in fact, Taylor, I will link back with you when we get to the public review period to comment on it. You'll have an opportunity to read that standard as the team put together and make comments. And what the team has to do is then resolve. We have to look each and every one of the public comments that come in and resolve it to make that a really robust standard. So I would expect sometime in 2022, I would predict probably around July, August, that we'll see that standard available and available for purchase.
Perfect. I'm sure we're all looking forward to that. Quick comment here as well. Very interesting presentation and very important for senior leadership understanding, one of our attendees said.
Oh, thank you.
Another question coming in. How do you bridge the gap between those who do not feel quality culture is important and those who do?
Oh, wow. It is a very difficult question. I would, wow. Culture is one of those things. It's really interesting because it gets away from you, and companies' cultures change. If you are a small company just starting out, you have a very entrepreneurial kind of attitude toward the culture. It's close, you can do things, that you might not be able to do. You aren't pigeonholed, and usually you have a really good attitude towards the culture and towards the organization. But quality culture, and I like to think of it, we call it quality culture. Sometimes that's gets people to thinking it's the culture of the quality department. It's not. It's the culture of the entire organization. And as you grow, that's the hardest thing to keep, is the culture that you've established. As your company grows, to maintain the culture you had in the beginning is really hard as you bring in other people and on board. And so you just need people. The best way to keep your quality culture and to encourage people to participate and think that it's important is to keep raising issues, keep being the ethical voice, keep talking about the deviations and then process improvements and how, because ultimately if we look at, and there was a slide and you can probably find it in the public domain in one of the PDA presentations, there's a slide that actually breaks down how much money it costs the company if you don't investigate correctly and you don't solve the problem. And it can be a significant number of dollars, in the millions, for just one error can cost. And if you think about it, the error, the deviation has to be investigated, resources dedicated to solving the problems, processes potentially need to be changed. And if you don't get it right, you're back at the drawing board, reinvestigating the process. So culture is important because you do want people, when they see inefficiencies in your organization or things that aren't right, and they don't understand their role in the organization, which limits them right away if they don't understand the mission of the company. You can spend a lot of dollars fixing problems that over and over and over again. It's a repeat, cyclical. Think about Jose, the operator, and how many hours were spent retraining him, that if somebody had just listened to him in the proper culture, they could have saved a lot of money and a lot of time. So I think you just need to keep being that voice of reason and that voice of ethics in order to convince people it's the right thing to do. Or you're going to end up in a situation you don't want to. I digress a little bit here, but there's a predictable cycle in some ways in the industry. I've never gotten the data together to prove it, but if you think about what happens is a company, they have, let's start with a consent decree. And this is about a 10-year cycle that it takes for this to play out. But a company has a consent decree. And so what they do is they hire a bunch of consultants who come in and tell them, fix this, fix that. And they fix the processes and the systems, and you hire a lot of quality people. And you chug along for a couple of years, no 483s, no, everything's fine. Look, we're doing well. And somebody says, wow, we're doing so well. Do we really need all these quality people, right? It took us 2 years to get these, 2 to 3 years to get the systems in place to deal with the consent decree and the issues, or the warning letter and the issues. And then we have about 2 or 3 years where everything's fine. We have no observations. We have no problems. Do we need all these people, right? Because there's nothing happening. And so then you start to realign things, you fire people, downsize certain activities. And it's going to take about 2 to 3 years for those systems to start to degrade. And then you're right back where you started with the repeat 483s and the warning letters. And that's why, if we don't remember why we put these systems in place in the first place, we're doomed to repeat this cycle. And that's what we want to break out. And part of breaking out of that cycle is paying attention to your quality culture.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Another question. What do you see as major challenges in developing quality culture?
I think the major challenge is to refrain or restrain yourself from, we've identified these 5 categories, and I think people tend to want to equate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to A, B, C, D, F. That's not what it is, right? This is where we're at on the maturity level. And it may be perfectly appropriate for you to be at a 5 in one area and a 2 in another, because maybe you're a 2 in an area that's not really your wheelbase, your wheelhouse, right? And that may be okay. And so it's just a way for you to assess, here we're on this continuum, we're at a 2. Do we need to be any more? So it's a way to focus your resources to those quality culture, quality attributes that are impactful to your organization, and really develop the ones that are the most meaningful to your organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the challenge is refraining yourself from grading it and saying, a 2 is bad, a 5 is great, I'm going to be a 5. And also to realize that once you achieve your 5, you're going to have to keep working at it to keep it at a 5. And so this is a snapshot in time. And in order to maintain your ranking, whether it's a 3 to a 5 or a 2 or a 1, you have to really pay attention to it and work on it to keep it where you want it to be and where it needs to be for your organization and for the work that you do.
Yes. And then we have a comment from an attendee that kind of ties into this. They said positive and authentic leadership matters to succeed.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think you see that reflected in the guidances that we talked about, or the regulations, where they're actually saying it's senior management, executive management that needs to lead the charge here.
Gotcha. Okay, well, any more questions at this time, please put them in the chat. Or if you have a question after the fact of this webinar presentation, please reach out to myself or Sue, and we'd be happy to help you through it. Thank you all for attending today. And thank you, Sue. This was a great presentation, and we're looking forward to hopefully another one with you one day.
That would be great. It's a little mini class on quality culture and some of the background and why we're going. And I would just caution everybody, pay attention to your quality culture. It's coming. It's coming. Evaluation of it is coming. And it's important.
Yes. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for attending. Again, we will share these slides with you because there's a lot of useful information. And we'll also be sharing a recording of this presentation. We will see you at the next Redica Systems webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.